So something's been on my mind this last week or so, and some of it stems from a video that I reviewed of a gentleman who was allegedly an open-air preacher, street evangelist, and he was quite rude to law enforcement. He considered himself too good to respect the officers. He actually commented on the video breakdown I did, and one of the statements that he said was, or made, was that he only gives respect to people who earn it, and he wasn't going to show respect to the officer who initially confronted him because he was so lacking in respect himself. And so I get that from a worldly perspective. I understand that. I think one of the things that I've always tried to emphasize to people around me, especially to my children, is that not only should you show respect and deference to people in law enforcement, but Christianity as a whole demands that we show a certain level of respect for all people. So that we know that the second great commandment is to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. And Paul says in Philippians chapter 2, therefore if there's any encouragement in Christ, if there's any consolation of love, if there's any fellowship of the Spirit, if any affection and compassion, make my joy complete by being of the same mind, maintaining the same love, united in spirit, intent on one purpose. Do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility of mind regard one another as more important than yourselves. Now admittedly, Paul's writing to the church here. Okay, so I understand that, I get that. But this is an application that we can use towards understanding how we should be interacting with the lost. Do not merely look out for your own personal interests, but also for the interests of others. Have this attitude in yourselves, which was also in Christ Jesus, who, although he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a bondservant, and being made in the likeness of men. Being found in the appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Jesus didn't owe us that. Jesus didn't owe us that kind of self-sacrificial love, that self-debasing in a way that he did. So when we're interacting with law enforcement, when we are confronted by people in positions of authority, and it's 98% of the time it's going to be law enforcement for those of us who are on the streets as ministers of the gospel, we best represent Christ not by asserting our rights, not by returning to the people that we are dealing with the same kind of attitude that they may be displaying to us, but by showing respect, showing deference to them, oftentimes understanding that they're merely responding to a complaint from a citizen who they are there to serve, whether they agree with our message or not. Now, does that mean there isn't a time and a place to fight for your rights as an American citizen? Absolutely not. I believe firmly that the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights gives us these God-given guidelines for what it means to have those freedoms here in the United States. I don't have a problem with that. What I have a problem with is when Christians make that the end all and the be all of their entire argument with law enforcement. There's a time and a place to fight everything. And you're never going to win that fight on the street. So in case of the video that I mentioned, he won in the sense that he got a supervisor there. He had, I think it was like a total of 5 or 6 officers at one time that were on scene. And he won. But he looked asinine in the winning. And his parting shot to the officer was to call him fat, because the officer was overweight. Does that sound like Christ? Sure, Jesus had harsh things to say to people. Nobody's going to argue that. He called the Pharisees a brood of vipers. He called them children of their father Satan. But is that the way we are to conduct ourselves with people in positions of authority, even if we don't agree with them? Especially when we've won the day. See, he didn't win. He made himself look like a jerk. He made himself look like an idiot. And so my plea to all of my fellow street preachers, to all of my fellow ministers of the gospel, when you're interacting with law enforcement, ask serious questions. There is a group, it's called the Center for Religious Expression. I am a client, so to speak, of theirs. I have contacted them. They do everything pro bono. Their number one advice to me is don't push it to get it to the point of arrest. If your rights are being violated, don't push it to the point of arrest. Remove yourself from the scene. Make sure that you have the officer's name, and then you fight it through the system, through a civil complaint. And they do say that we have, they got these cards. Oops. They sent me this card. It has a series of questions on it. So, like the first one is, why am I being restricted? So, restrictions cannot be based on dislike for message. Determine why you are restricted. When are you restricted? So, restrictions may be valid at times, but invalid at others. So, find out when the restriction applies. How are you restricted? Legality of restriction can depend on the parameters. Determine whether it relates to noise level, literature distribution, signage, etc. Who is restricting me? What is being restricted? Where is the speech being restricted? So there's a series of questions that you can ask, things that you need to know. And I'd say take advantage of that information. Don't whip out a 5-page printout of all the court cases that prove that you have the right to be where you are. The Constitution of the United States already verifies that, already validates that. As long as you're in a public place. But don't push it to the point of arrest. And be respectful. Don't call names. Don't be in your face about it. I'm not saying be pathetic and a pushover. Try to stand your ground respectfully. And I'm going to be showing, as part of this video, a clip of my beloved brother Kevin Yount as we were ministering in Rock Island at a Metrolink bus station. His interaction with the officer, and I interact as well. I believe that Kevin handled it very well. And we ended up not having to stop. But it's about how you handle it. And so I guess if it's a badge of honor for you as a minister of the gospel to be arrested, is that persecution? Yes. But if your first response is to talk about how your rights are being violated and to blast it all over social media, then I think you need to ask yourself and question yourself and say up front, what's more important to me? The image that I am giving people of public ministry and the picture I am painting of what it means to be Christ-like? Or is it more important that I win right there, no matter what? If you're going to push it to the point of arrest, make sure you're being very respectful. If you're going to push it to the point of arrest and you're being a jerk, I'm not going to back you up. And maybe that doesn't matter to anybody. Nobody follows me on social media, so I have no illusions of grandeur here. But imagine how much you harm the testimony of the bride of Christ when you say you are out there representing the sovereign God of all creation, and you're disrespectful, and you're rude, and churlish, and childish, and you sound like the world when you're asserting your rights over and over and over again. Sometimes we get what we deserve. There's a time and a place to fight it, and you don't do that by being disrespectful on the scene. Sometimes it's best to walk away and find people who are willing to fight for you through the system that's in place, even if it means that your ministry is hindered for even a brief time. More often than not, that type of response is going to commend the gospel and say far more about your Christ-likeness and how godly you are than winning the right of the day and asserting your First Amendment rights vocally and vitriolically. I think I just made up a word. Above all, when we're doing ministry on the street, people need to hear love, compassion, severe respect for God, and severe respect for our fellow man, especially those that God has appointed to be ministers of His justice. Most of them don't want to deal with you as a street preacher. Most of them would much rather be dealing with true criminals. Don't give them a reason to despise you because of your attitude and your response. I can only say it so many times. Take it to the courts. On the street, in the moment, is not the time to get in an officer's face and tell them how wrong they are. You have to really, for lack of better terminology, hit the agency where it hurts with a lawsuit. Just something to think about. Soli Deo Gloria. That, but there's a difference between killing and murder.
Well, officer,
What can I do for you, ma'am?
we've just had some complaints about the volume and how it's really loud on the mic. Is there any way you can just preach, like, not...
Well, I'll turn the amp down a little bit if that's...
We've just had complaints on the amp specifically. Like, is there... It's not a... Like, is there any way you can just preach just straight without the microphone?
Well, I've been... This is Todd's first time here, and I live in Davenport.
I've seen you guys here
Yeah,
before.
yeah.
I'm just saying, we got some complaints today,
I've been coming here since last August.
Right.
And
I've seen you guys,
yeah,
so...
and I've never had... I've always kept the amp at basically the same level, and the only reason is that, you know, when the buses come by, the noise of the buses comes up really high, and we try to use the amps to not ease feel like we're yelling at people.
If
And
we-
so hopefully it sounds like it might be louder, and hopefully it seems like it's more conversational if we're not trying to holler at people.
We just had most complaints on the sound, and they said there was a bullhorn, but I didn't see one of those around.
Yeah,
so
they're just
it's
little-
just
little-
the
I could turn the amp
Yeah.
down some,
Yeah, we'd
but
be happy
If
to
you
turn
would
it down
turn
a
it-
little bit,
turn it
and
down a bit.
would be okay if when buses come, you know, if we need to, you know, but we'll be careful with that.
Okay,
No
well,
problem
I
at all.
appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you,
yeah,
guys.
yes,
Appreciate
yes.
that.
Thank you, officer.
thank you
You
for
guys
what
have
you
a-
do.
God bless you.